Welcome back. This is the second session on environmental communication as a part of the environmental policy course at Wageningen University. We're going to zoom in on to the model provided by the Dutch Council for the Living Environment. In session 2A, we already talked about the different components of this model, where we look at people's motives for considering a different kind of behavior, the circumstances under which they live that might influence those choices, their capacities, their abilities to make change, the kinds of choices they have, which are based on their habits, but also on their beliefs in their instincts and their intuition, but also on their what you might call their reasoned behavior or calculated or strategic behavior. All these motives, circumstances, abilities, and choice processes influence behavior, and we already talked about the behavior change itself can have a positive feedback loop where you actually enjoy the new behavior, and it might also improve your abilities when you exercise or practice that new behavior. So you're actually learning more as you go. It could also work the other way around, where you find yourself struggling and maybe not see the benefits of the new behavior, and you might slide back into your old behavior. The model for policymakers, but you can also use this for as an NGO or a societal organization wanting to influence behavior towards a more sustainable lifestyle or healthier lifestyle or more a caring lifestyle for others or other species. So it depends a lot on your goals that you want to pursue and also on how you want to involve people in those goals. We already talked about a more instrumental way of doing that, where you really try to influence that behavior. You might even manipulate people into that behavior, to nudging, social marketing, but also the more interactive, co-creative, more social learning oriented approaches, which are more about engaging people, empowering people, giving them the abilities to make changes themselves. So the question, the 5 elements of this model are: first, you need to identify what is the policy problem here. What do you want to achieve in society? You want to have people engaged in healthier diets, reduce obesity, but also maybe reduce the carbon footprint of the diets people have, and maybe consider also the well-being of other species. So that might be your objective, to increase health and to increase people's capacity to reduce climate change, and so on. But then you also need to translate those objectives in terms of behavior. What kind of behavior change is then needed to meet those policy objectives? When you talk about, say, shifting towards a vegan or vegetarian diet, if that were your objective, then you might want to consider also what kind of behavior do people currently have? How do they make choices about their food? What are their considerations, their motives, their abilities, their circumstances that under which they make those choices? So how can that behavior be explained? What are the determinants of that behavior? And here we look at these abilities, the motives, and the circumstances, and the kinds of behavior that you can affect: the habitual, the intuitive, and the reasoned behavior. Fourthly, what policy strategies then will be effective? Are these strategies that are mainly communication, education, capacity building oriented, and within that more persuasive or more relational, interactive, but also might there be other strategies, economic or legal strategies that could work well as part of the mix of strategies that you use? So this all needs to be carefully considered. And then in the end, what policy instruments are available and appropriate? And we'll show a few examples of these. Once you have designed your communication strategy, then you also need to have some kind of indicators that can measure whether you were successful in achieving your goals. So there needs to be an evaluation component to this. So what is the policy problem is the first question that needs to be asked. What are we trying to solve here? And what is the policy objective in terms of behavior? Let's stick to the changing of diets towards more protein-based diets to reduce the animal protein, so plant protein, as opposed to animal protein as a contribution to reducing CO2 emissions, perhaps, or to improve animal well-being. There might be different motives for doing this, or maybe having healthier lifestyles associated with that. Then once you've said this, then you need to zoom in on people's motives. What are people's attitudes? What are their beliefs about vegan diets or vegetarian diets? Are there some misconceptions possibly? What are their attitudes towards a non-meat based diet? But also, what is the social norm? Do people live in an environment that kind of invites switching to vegan or vegetarian diets, or do they live maybe in an environment that does more or less the opposite, where the normal is to eat meat every day, and you kind of don't fit? The social norm might be working against this idea. And then the circumstances. Do you have the possibility to shop for a variety of different vegetables, spices, herbs? Is it affordable? Do you also have the ability to cook vegetarian meals in a good way? If you're good at that or get better at that, or if you have people around you who can do that, the likelihood of having an enjoyable vegetarian meal is much greater than when you do not have that. And of course, you have habits of eating meat, perhaps, or having dairy products every day. Maybe you grew up with that, and so there's the habitual behavior, but there might also be intuitive behavior, where you might intuitively feel that if you, for instance, buy very cheap chicken that is raised in industrial agriculture, that there might be some intuitive and maybe emotional underpinning, that there's a nagging feeling of unease that actually makes it somewhat troubling for you, but you may never have acted upon those feelings. So you need to consider all these aspects that can explain behavior. And now the way we are talking about this, we are basically dissecting the abilities in people's knowledge about vegetarian options, but also knowledge about maybe the downside of meat-based diets and the impact on the environment and on animal well-being. That requires knowledge, but also the skills to cook a good meal on a vegetarian basis. That has to do with skills. And then there's all these motives that can be dissected into values. Do you find ecological values important, for instance, and the values of the integrity of other species? Is that's important for you? That will have an impact on your likelihood to change. But if you value maybe saving money on your diets because you want to achieve other goals, then the economic value might be much stronger. And so this is different for different people. The emotional aspect, similarly, some people might get very emotional about the images they might see from industrial agriculture, and others might actually not be affected by that, or they avoid it. They avoid the dissonance they get by being exposed to that. So when you do a campaign and you try to develop a strategy, you need to look at all these aspects carefully, and then to identify where is it that I can have the most impact in trying to bring about change. And then the circumstances might be conducive to that change, or maybe there are some barriers that you need to be addressing, social, cultural, or technological barriers that also are important. The fourth aspect is the strategies. I already talked about that earlier. It's very important that we think about the most effective strategies appropriate for the kind of people you are working with, also considering the social cultural backgrounds, the literacy level people have, The education level might also have an influence on how you approach people, and what strategy you choose to use. And then we get to the policy instruments, and there are many instruments that can be used. For instance, all these symbols refer to an instrument. You could appeal to emotions, and you can appeal to a campaign highlighting the desired behavior, and have people experience the positive impact of a new behavior. Like closing a city center to cars may lead to all kinds of benefits that you may not have anticipated at first. Cleaner air, for instance, maybe more time, feeling less rushed. There might be all kinds of hidden advantages that were not considered before. Having people show their commitment by signing a declaration of intent, for instance. Looking for rewards, rewarding groups for changes, giving positive feedback. It could be economic, giving them discounts, for instance. And there's also the possibility of giving positive feedback, which can encourage people to continue their behavior. The financial measures, think about deposits on recyclable containers, road taxing, subsidies. These are more the economic instruments, but they can help reinforce a sustainable behavior. And they also need a communication component to explain to people how they work and why they have been designed in that way. There's also the possibility of providing certain prescriptive measures, closing city center. Those are spatial policy tools, really. They can be combined with a communication and education strategy as well. Campaigning to associate the sustainable choices with positive emotions, solar panels, reduce household energy bills. These are all different kinds of instruments that can be used, but usually they overlap, and usually they will need to be used in combination with one another. And I'm not going to touch upon all of these, but the Dutch Council for the Living Environment document that you have explains it in far more detail. So to summarize, think about the policy problem first. Try to translate it in terms of desirable behavior. Look for the different determinants of that behavior and look for the low-hanging fruit. Where might you have the most impact? So do an analysis of the people you want to work with, the people you want to engage in a new behavior. Then think about the policy strategies that might be combined, that might be effective. Think about the specific tools you might want to employ to have that impact. And you might want to evaluate what tools have the most impact. You might evaluate your campaign in terms of effectiveness, and you may need to do a few rounds of redesigning the campaign or the strategies and the tools that you used before you finalize them. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of this, all these steps. I'm just going to show you very quickly that in the document of the Council, you will find examples and also how to use these different aspects of the model. I encourage you to go there to have a look for some of the examples that are explained in the document, and I think you will have quite a comprehensive view of how the model works. Play with the model. You could pick a topic like the ones listed here and start thinking about the different steps in terms of how you might influence people's behavior in relation to car sharing or increasing backyard biodiversity or using sustainable energy and so on. I encourage you to play around with the model to make it come alive. Again, if you have questions about this, go to the virtual classroom, join me and others in having some conversation about this, and you can always email me as well. Do have a look at the document and read it and try to comprehend it as much as you can.